Okay, so I want to talk about something today that honestly just blew my mind when I first looked into it. And I think it is going to blow your mind too. Because what the Federal Reserve is doing right now to keep inflation high is not some complicated economic theory. It is actually really simple once someone explains it to you. And that is exactly what I am going to do today. So let me break this down. Okay, so first things first, let me ask you a simple question. What is inflation? Like actually, what is it? Because I think a lot of people have a vague idea, but they do not really understand the mechanism. So let me explain it as simply as possible. Inflation is what happens when there are more dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services. That is it. That is the whole thing. More money, same stuff, prices go up. Less money, same stuff, prices stay stable or go down. This is not a controversial statement. Every economist agrees on this. So with that in mind, let me show you something. The M2 money supply is basically the total amount of dollars that exist in the economy. Savings accounts, checking accounts, cash, money market funds, all of it. And if you look at what the M2 money supply is doing right now in 2026, you will see that it is growing at a rate of about 6% year over year. Okay? So that means there are 6% more dollars in the economy this year compared to last year. Now, the Federal Reserve says inflation is running at 3.8% according to the CPI report. And their preferred measure, which is core PCE, says it is at about 3.3%. Okay, but the M2 money supply is growing at 6%. So ask yourself, if there are 6% more dollars in the system, how is inflation only 3.3 or 3.8%? The answer is that the way they calculate inflation matters a lot, and I am going to come back to that. But first, I need to tell you about something that just happened that changes everything. So the Federal Reserve had a new chair just take over. His name is Kevin Warsh. He was sworn in on April 21st, and his first FOMC meeting as chair is going to be on June 17th, which is literally next week. Now, here is the backstory on Warsh because it is important. President Trump was absolutely furious at the previous Fed chair, Jerome Powell. Trump wanted Powell to cut interest rates aggressively. Powell refused because inflation was still too high, and Trump was so frustrated that he called Powell an idiot, a dummy, a loser. He did this publicly in front of reporters. He even had the Justice Department launch a criminal investigation against Powell, which everyone understood as a pressure campaign. And then when Powell's term expired, Trump put in Kevin Warsh. So the expectation is clear. Trump wants lower interest rates. Warsh got the job. The assumption from Trump's side is that Warsh is going to cut rates. But here is the problem. And this is the dangerous part of what I want to talk to you about today. Inflation is not cooperating, like at all. CPI came in at 3.8% in April. May is expected to come in even higher, probably around 4.2% or more, and the M2 money supply is growing at 6%. And on top of all of that, the Federal Reserve has been quietly doing something since December 2025 that is going to make inflation even harder to bring down. And this is the thing I really want you to understand today. In December 2025, the Fed announced that they were going to start buying government bonds again, $40 billion a month. They called it reserve management purchases. They said it was just a technical operation to keep the financial system's plumbing running smoothly. They said it was not quantitative easing. And I want you to think about that for a second. $40 billion a month, created out of thin air, used to buy government bonds, pumped into the financial system, and they are telling us this is not money printing. Okay, look, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it reserve management purchases. You can call it technical operations. You can call it Tuesday. But when the Federal Reserve creates new money and buys assets with it, more money ends up in the financial system. And more money in the financial system puts upward pressure on prices. That is just what happens. That is not my opinion. That is how it works. Since December, the Fed has already expanded its balance sheet by over $200 billion doing this. $200 billion in new money pumped into the economy while inflation is already running above 3.5%. And they are telling you this is not a big deal. So that is the first dangerous way the Fed is keeping inflation high. They are printing money and calling it something else. Now let me get to the second thing because this one honestly made me shake my head. So Kevin Warsh has a plan for how to make the inflation numbers look better without actually fixing inflation. And I am not making this up. This is documented. This is what he has been saying publicly. His plan is to change how they calculate inflation. I am serious. The easiest way to get inflation down to 2% is to change the calculator. And that is what they are considering doing. So right now, the Fed uses something called core PCE inflation. This strips out food and energy prices because those are volatile. And it is currently running at 3.3%. Their target is 2%. That gap is huge. At 3.3%, prices double every 21 years. At 2%, prices double every 35 years. That is a massive difference for regular people trying to save money and plan for retirement. Now, Warsh wants to switch to something called trimmed mean inflation. What trimmed mean does is it drops the most extreme price changes from the calculation. So if oil prices spike because of the Iran war, they just exclude those numbers. If some other category is rising really fast, they exclude that too. And what you get is a number that looks lower. Using the trimmed mean calculation, inflation right now looks like about 2.3%. So we have gone from 3.3% on core PCE to 2.3% on trimmed mean. Not because anything actually got cheaper, just because we changed the math. And if you are at 2.3%, well, that is really close to the Fed's target of 2.0%, which means Warsh could justify cutting interest rates, which is exactly what Trump wants, which is why Warsh has the job. Do you see how this works? I mean, I warned you it was going to be a bit ridiculous. But there it is. Now let me just play this out because I want you to see what the actual consequences are for your wallet. If the Fed cuts interest rates right now, with inflation already rising, with M2 growing at 6%, with the balance sheet expanding by $40 billion a month, and with May CPI expected to come in even higher than April, what happens? Inflation goes up, full stop. Lower interest rates make borrowing cheaper. More borrowing means more spending. More spending with the same amount of goods means higher prices. You cannot cut rates into a rising inflation environment and expect prices to stabilize. That is not how this works. But before I get to what this means for you personally, I want to show you one more thing that ties all of this together, because I think when you see this, it is going to click for you in a way that makes everything make sense. Okay, so remember I said that the M2 money supply is growing at 6%, and CPI says inflation is at 3.8%. And the Fed's preferred measure, core PCE, says it is at 3.3%. And trimmed mean, the new measure Warsh likes, says it is at 2.3%. So we have the same economy, the same prices, the same grocery store. And depending on which measuring stick you use, inflation is anywhere from 2.3% to 6%. Now think about why this matters beyond just the academic debate. The government ties a lot of things to the official inflation number. Social Security cost of living adjustments are based on CPI. If inflation is really running at 6%, but they are paying out Social Security increases based on 3.8%, retirees are losing ground every single year. If they switch to trimmed mean and it shows 2.3%, retirees get even smaller increases. Meanwhile, their actual grocery bills, their actual utility bills, their actual Medicare costs are going up much faster. So when you change the calculation, who benefits? The government pays less in Social Security adjustments. The Fed can justify cutting rates, and regular people slowly lose purchasing power while being told inflation is basically under control. I am not saying this is intentional. I am just saying that is the consequence. And I think it is important that you understand that when you hear an official inflation number, it is worth asking which measuring stick they are using and why. So what does that mean for you personally? Your grocery bill. If the Fed cuts rates and inflation accelerates from 3.8 to 5 or 6%, everything you buy at the grocery store costs more. And if you are already feeling stretched at the grocery store right now, imagine that getting worse. Because that is what happens when the Fed pumps gas onto the inflationary fire. Your mortgage rate. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. A lot of people think that if the Fed cuts rates, mortgage rates go down, and that is partly true. But here is the nuance. Mortgage rates track the 10-year Treasury yield, not directly the Fed funds rate. And if the market believes the Fed is cutting rates into rising inflation, the bond market gets nervous. Inflation eats bond returns. So bond investors demand higher yields to compensate, which means the 10-year goes up, which means mortgage rates actually stay high or go even higher, even if the Fed is cutting its short-term rate. So the people waiting for lower mortgage rates could actually end up worse off if Warsh cuts rates prematurely. The market is smarter than that. The market sees through this. And let me show you what the market actually thinks right now. According to the CME FedWatch tool, at the June 17th meeting, there is about a 98 or 99% chance that the Fed holds rates exactly where they are. Warsh is not going to cut at his first meeting. The data does not support it, and he knows the optics of cutting at your first meeting while inflation is rising would be terrible. For the July 29th meeting, the highest probability is still no change. But here is what is wild. There is actually a small percentage chance that rates get raised at the July meeting. Not cut, raised. Because inflation is not going down. It is going up. And if you look at the December 9th meeting, which is the last Fed meeting of the year, the market has actually priced in a 54% chance that interest rates will be higher by the end of 2026 than they are today. Not lower, higher. And that is the market saying, we do not believe this inflation story. We think rates are going to have to go up, not down. So now imagine how President Trump is going to react if Warsh raises interest rates. Remember, Trump gave him this job to cut rates. If Warsh has to raise rates instead because inflation is spiking, that is going to be a very difficult situation. And that is the trap the Fed is in. If they cut rates, inflation accelerates. If they raise rates, the economy and the housing market and the government's borrowing costs all go up. And if they hold rates the same, the economy continues to weaken because high rates are still squeezing consumers and businesses. There is no easy way out of this, and the Fed made it harder on themselves by quietly printing $200 billion since December, while telling everyone inflation was their top priority. Okay, so what does all of this mean for you, and what should you actually be doing with your money right now? Number one, do not assume relief is coming soon. Whether it is mortgage rates, credit card rates, or the cost of goods, the picture I just described to you does not point to significant relief in the next 6 to 12 months. Plan your finances around current conditions, not hoped-for conditions. Number two, if you are carrying credit card debt, treat it as the emergency it is. Your card is charging you around 22 to 24% interest right now. That rate is not coming down meaningfully anytime soon. Every month you carry that balance, the inflation story is winning and your wallet is losing. Number three, make sure your savings are actually earning something. High-yield savings accounts are paying around 4 to 4.1% right now. The national average for a regular savings account is like 0.4%. That is a 10 to 1 difference. On $20,000, that is a difference of over $700 per year. There is no reason to leave money in a regular savings account in this environment. Number four, watch what happens at the June 17th meeting very closely. This is Warsh's debut. What he says in his press conference is going to tell us a lot about the direction of policy for the rest of the year. Pay attention to whether he signals any openness to the trimmed mean calculation change. If he does, that is your signal that rate cuts may come, even though inflation has not actually been solved. And number five, be very skeptical of inflation numbers going forward. If they change the calculation method and suddenly inflation looks like it is at 2.3%, that does not mean your grocery bill got cheaper. It means they changed the math. Your lived experience of prices is real. The M2 money supply growing at 6% is real. Do not let a changed calculation make you complacent about what is actually happening to your purchasing power. You know, I said at the start that today's video was going to be a bit ridiculous, and I stand by that because the idea that the solution to an inflation problem is to change how you calculate inflation, like that is actually being considered. That is where we are. The math is not working, so they want to change the calculator. And look, I am not saying Warsh is a bad person. I am not saying this is some evil conspiracy. What I am saying is that when you have a president who wants rate cuts, a new Fed chair who got the job to deliver them, and inflation that is still running hot and getting hotter, the pressure to find a creative solution is enormous, and changing the calculation is a creative solution. Whether it is the right solution for regular Americans who are still paying too much for groceries and gas is a different question entirely. Okay, so that is going to do it for today. If you found this helpful, do me a favor and subscribe, because I cover these Fed decisions and economic data reports as they happen. And what happens at the June 17th meeting is going to be one of the most important Fed decisions in years. I will break it down for you the moment it happens, so you know exactly what it means for your money. Now, there is a school of thought that says Warsh is actually more hawkish than people think, that he got this job not because he promised Trump rate cuts, but because he has a real plan to deal with inflation. If that is the case, maybe he does not cut rates. Maybe he actually raises them. The market already has a meaningful probability of a rate hike by year end, and if that happens, the housing market takes another hit. Credit card rates stay high or go higher. Business borrowing costs increase, and any recession the economy was already drifting toward gets more likely. But the other path, where he cuts rates or changes the inflation calculation to justify cuts, leads to higher actual inflation, even if the official numbers look better. Your grocery bill does not care what the trimmed mean calculation says. Your gas pump does not know about core PCE. The prices you pay every day are real. So in either direction, the environment we are in is not going away quickly. And that is my honest read of the situation. I know some channels are going to tell you the Fed is about to pivot and everything is going to get better and mortgage rates are going to crash. I am not going to tell you that because I do not think the data supports it. The Fed is printing money and calling it something else. They are considering changing the inflation calculator. The new chair has his first meeting next week. The market thinks there is more than a 50% chance rates go higher by year end, not lower. Stay well informed. Take care, and I will see you at the next one.